The fog was thick that morning. It rolled slowly across the French countryside, curling around broken fences and burned-out vehicles left behind from last night's battle. In the pale dawn, a small group of Wehrmacht mechanics walked cautiously along a muddy road, their boots squelching in the dirt. Among them was Feldwebel Karl Weiss, a senior mechanic known for his skill and silence. He had seen too many engines die, too many soldiers walk instead of ride. Germany's war machine was running on fumes. Then he saw it. Through the mist, half hidden by the wreckage of an old farmhouse, stood a truck, large, olive green, and strangely untouched by battle. The star on its door told the story. It was American. Weiss raised his hand. "Hold," he ordered softly. The men froze. Slowly he approached the vehicle, his breath visible in the cold air. The hood was slightly open. The metal was warm to the touch. Someone had driven it recently. Private Mueller, the youngest in the unit, whispered nervously, "Do you think they abandoned it, Herr Feldwebel?" Weiss didn't answer right away. He scanned the horizon, listening for engines, for voices, but there was only the wind. Finally, he said, "No, they left it because they could afford to." The men exchanged confused looks. Weiss pulled open the door. The interior smelled of oil and tobacco. On the seat lay a soldier's jacket with a patch that read U.S. Army Transportation Corps. He turned the key gently. The dashboard lights flickered. Everything looked new, efficient, perfect. "Look at this," Weiss muttered. The gauges were clear, neatly labeled. The radio still worked. The seats were cushioned. Every inch of the truck screamed precision. German trucks were rough, metallic, and noisy. This one felt effortless. Mueller climbed up beside him. "They have radios in every truck?" Weiss nodded slowly. "Yes, and we don't even have enough for our tanks." He opened the glove compartment. Inside were papers, maintenance records, typed neatly, listing inspection dates, oil changes, and replacement schedules. Each truck had its own system, its own plan. Everything was tracked. "They even record oil changes," Mueller said, amazed. Weiss frowned. "They plan everything, Mueller. We improvise. That's why we're losing." The men towed the truck back to their repair outpost, a half-ruined barn outside Caen. Under the dim lantern light, Weiss began taking it apart, piece by piece. What he found left him speechless. Every bolt fit perfectly. Every component could be removed easily and replaced without special tools. The design was logical, efficient, built for mass production. He turned one of the parts over in his hands, reading a small code stamped into the metal. "Standardized," he murmured. "The same part fits 100 other trucks. That's how they do it." While Germany prided itself on craftsmanship, machines built by hand with care and precision, America was building machines by the millions, each identical to the next. One was art, the other was unstoppable. Weiss realized that the truck was more than a vehicle. It was proof of a system that Germany could never match. He sat quietly, staring at the engine that ran smoother than anything he'd ever seen. It didn't sputter, it didn't stall. Even after being hit by shrapnel, it came back to life with a single turn of the key. 3 days later, after endless nights of work, the engine roared to life again. The sound filled the barn. It was calm, steady, powerful. The German mechanic stood silently, listening. Weiss turned to Mueller. "Do you hear that? It runs like it's alive." Mueller smiled faintly. "Then we can use it, yeah?" Weiss shook his head. "It's not about using it, it's about understanding it." He placed his hand on the hood. "This truck will keep going when ours break down. They can drive through hell and come out alive. That's why they're winning." Outside, the sound of bombers rolled across the sky. Weiss stepped out of the barn, looking up as a wave of American B-17s flew overhead. The ground shook. He looked back at the truck, shining faintly in the sunlight breaking through the clouds. He whispered, This isn't just a truck, it's the future. We were never fighting an army, we were fighting a factory. That night, he sat on a wooden crate and began writing in his small leather notebook. It was a letter, one he would never send. His handwriting was shaky but determined. "Today I repaired an American truck," he wrote. "I touched the strength of a nation that builds faster than we can destroy. We believed our skill would win this war, but skill cannot defeat a machine that never stops producing. When a mechanic sees the future in a truck, he knows his country is already lost." He closed the notebook and tucked it into his coat. The next morning, his superior, Hauptmann Dietrich, arrived at the barn. "I hear you've got the American vehicle running," he said. "Good. We'll use it for supply transport." Weiss protested. "Sir, we should study it, learn from it." Dietrich shook his head. "Orders are orders. If it runs, it serves." Reluctantly, Weiss handed over the keys. The truck was loaded with ammunition and supplies and sent toward the front line. Muller drove, proud but nervous. "She drives like a dream," he said before leaving. Weiss nodded, but didn't smile. Hours later, the sound of distant gunfire echoed. Then came the roar of a plane. Weiss ran outside and looked to the horizon. A single P-47 Thunderbolt swooped down low, its guns blazing. Moments later, a plume of fire rose from the road beyond the trees. The American truck was gone. Weiss stood frozen. Smoke curled into the gray sky, twisting like the end of a dream. Muller and the others never came back. The truck that had revealed America's strength was now a burning wreck in a French field. That night, Weiss didn't sleep. He sat beside the barn, staring into the darkness. He thought about the factory workers in Detroit and Chicago, people he had never met, building machines faster than anyone could destroy them. They didn't fight on the front lines, but they were the true soldiers of this war. When morning came, he spoke quietly to another mechanic. "Do you know what doomed us?" he asked. "Not the Americans, not the Russians, our pride. We built perfection when we should have built numbers." He looked down at his hands, calloused and blackened with grease. Once those hands had built tanks and engines that symbolized German precision. Now they felt useless against the unstoppable tide of mass production. As the days passed, whispers spread through the unit. The story of the captured American truck, the one that ran perfectly even after battle, became a legend among the soldiers. Some called it the truck that never died. Others said it was proof that the war was already lost. For Weiss, it was both. Weeks later, Allied forces pushed deeper into France. Weiss and his men were forced to retreat eastward, leaving behind most of their equipment. The barn burned during the withdrawal, taking with it every trace of the truck, but the memory stayed with him. Each time he saw another broken German vehicle, he remembered how easily the American truck had started, how quietly it had run, how simple it had been to fix. He realized that Germany's defeat was not written on a battlefield, but in the factories across the Atlantic. While his nation built masterpieces, the Allies built momentum. While German engineers chased perfection, the Allies chased progress. By the time Weiss reached the German border, the skies were filled with Allied planes. The roads were lined with refugees and broken machines. Somewhere beyond the Rhine, the sound of industry still echoed, relentless, mechanical, unstoppable. He thought of that truck one last time. Its smooth engine, its clean design, its quiet power. In its reflection, he had seen the future, a world where efficiency mattered more than craftsmanship, where planning defeated pride.
He whispered to himself, "They didn't just outfight us. They outbuilt us." As the war dragged on, Weiss carried his notebook with him, the one where he had written about the truck. It was the only thing he saved when the unit finally surrendered in 1945. He never spoke much after the war, but those who knew him said he would sometimes sit beside broken vehicles and stare into their engines, lost in thought. They didn't know what he was thinking, but deep inside, Carl Weiss remembered the moment he turned the key of that captured American truck, the moment he realized Germany's fate was sealed not by bombs or bullets, but by bolts, gears, and the endless rhythm of American industry.
The war ended in silence. Cities that once echoed with marching boots now lay in ruins. Smoke rose from what had been factories, homes, and hopes. For Feldwebel Karl Weiss, the surrender of 1945 was not a surprise. He had seen it coming the day he turned the key of that captured American truck. The engine's calm hum had whispered the truth. Germany had lost long before the final battle. In the first months after the surrender, Weiss was held in a British POW camp near Bremen. The camp was filled with defeated soldiers, tank crews, engineers, pilots, all broken men. They spoke in low voices about what went wrong. Some blamed Hitler, some blamed fate, but Weiss said little. He sat quietly under the barbed wire sky, repairing watches, boots, and bicycles. He was no longer a soldier. He was a mechanic with nothing left to fix. One morning, a British officer noticed his skill. "You're the one who repaired vehicles, yes?" the officer asked. Weiss nodded. "Good. We need men like you. The Americans are rebuilding Europe, and they're looking for workers who understand machines." It sounded strange to Weiss, the same Americans whose trucks had crushed his belief in German superiority now wanted him to help rebuild what they had destroyed. But he had nothing left to lose. He agreed. A few months later, he was transferred to a small industrial town in the British zone. There, the Allies were collecting old military vehicles, German, American, and British, to salvage what could be reused. Weiss found himself surrounded by machines again. Only this time, there were no uniforms, no ranks, no fear. Just metal, oil, and work. Among the wrecks was something that made his breath catch. A familiar shape. Rusted, burned, but unmistakable. A GMC truck, just like the one he had repaired in France. The paint was gone, the tires flat, but the bones of the machine were still strong. He walked around it slowly, touching the side. "You again," he whispered. It felt like meeting an old ghost. With permission from the camp supervisor, Weiss began to restore it. Piece by piece, he cleaned the engine, replaced broken parts with whatever he could find. American tools, British grease, German patience. It was a strange mix, but it worked. After weeks of effort, the engine came back to life. The same soft, steady hum filled the yard. The workers stopped what they were doing and stared. Even the British officers came to see it. "That's American engineering," one of them said proudly. Weiss didn't answer. He simply smiled, half in sadness, half in respect. That night, sitting beside the truck, he opened his old notebook, the one he had written in during the war. The pages were yellowed, the ink faded. He added a new line beneath his old words. "The machine that ended our war now begins our rebuilding." For the first time in years, he felt something close to hope. As months turned into years, Germany began to change. The ruins were cleared, factories reopened, and new machines began to roll out. But this time, they were not built for war. They were built for life. Tractors, delivery vans, buses. Weiss was among the thousands of mechanics who found new purpose in rebuilding a nation from the ground up. One day, in 1948, an American engineer visited the workshop where Weiss worked. His name was John Walker, a man in his 40s with kind eyes and a cigarette always between his fingers. He was part of the Marshall Plan, supervising German reconstruction. Walker noticed Weiss working on a truck engine with precision and curiosity. "You have good hands. You must have worked for the Army." Weiss smiled faintly. "Yes, I fixed tanks and trucks until the war fixed me." "Well, maybe now we can fix each other." Over time, the two men became friends. They spoke about machines, design, and the philosophy of engineering. Walker showed Weiss new blueprints, factory layouts, assembly line systems, production methods inspired by American industry. To Weiss, it was like seeing the inside of the captured truck again, but now without fear. It was learning, not losing. One afternoon, Walker asked, "Why do you care so much about how they built things? The war's over." Weiss looked at him and said quietly, "Because the truck taught me something. Victory belongs to those who can build, faster than they can break. I want to be part of that kind of world now." Walker smiled. "Then maybe you should come work with us. We're starting a new company here, mix of American and German engineers. We'll call it something simple, practical." Weiss accepted the offer. The factory became part of a growing network of small automobile companies that would later shape West Germany's industrial rebirth. For Weiss, it was more than a job. It was redemption. Every bolt he tightened, every engine he built was a step away from the ruins of the past. The lessons he had learned from that captured truck now guided his hands. Years passed. The war faded into memory. Germany's roads filled with vehicles again. Volkswagens, Opels, Mercedes, all symbols of a new beginning. And in every one of them, somewhere deep inside, was a piece of the lesson Carl Weiss had learned, that precision and planning could work together, that craftsmanship and mass production could coexist. In 1955, Weiss visited an automotive exhibition in Frankfurt. The hall was filled with shining new cars, sleek and modern. Crowds gathered around a display of engines. As he walked through the rows, he stopped suddenly. There, among the foreign designs, stood a restored American GMC truck, the same model he had seen years ago in France. Its paint gleamed, its engine polished to perfection. A small plaque read, "Symbol of Allied Logistics, the truck that helped win the war." Weiss stood silently for a long time. Around him, people took photographs, admiring its beauty. But he wasn't seeing a museum piece. He was seeing a memory. The mist, the field, the fear, the realization. He whispered to himself, "You were the beginning of the end, and maybe also the beginning of the new." An American visitor standing nearby overheard him. "Beautiful machine, isn't it?" the man said. Weiss nodded. "Yes, more than beautiful. It taught me the meaning of efficiency." The man smiled. "Efficiency built peace, too, my friend." Weiss smiled back. "Yes, it did." That evening he returned home and sat by his small workbench. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky orange and gold. He opened his notebook once more. On the final page he wrote, "The machine that ended our war taught us how to build peace. Power without wisdom destroys, but power guided by purpose rebuilds." As he closed the notebook, he heard the distant hum of traffic. Trucks, cars, buses, all moving toward a future that was finally theirs to choose. The sound reminded him of that old GMC engine, calm and steady, only now it no longer filled him with despair. It filled him with quiet pride. That truck became a symbol, not as a weapon, not as a trophy, but as a teacher. It reminded those who came after that even in the darkest ruins of defeat, knowledge could light the path to a better world. By the 1960s, Germany was no longer a land of ruins. The air no longer smelled of smoke and gunpowder, but of gasoline,
fresh paint, and progress. New factories stretched across the countryside, trains ran on time, and workers in clean uniforms walked through gates that once stood silent. The nation that had been broken 2 decades earlier was now called an economic miracle, the Wirtschaftswunder. But for men like Karl Weiss, the miracle was not magic, it was memory. Weiss was now in his late 50s. His hair had turned silver. His hands still carried the grease of a lifetime spent around engines. He worked as a senior consultant for a German automotive firm that built transport trucks. The company's success had drawn attention from both Europe and America. Ironically, it was an American company that wanted to partner with them, to share designs, to build faster, smarter, stronger. During a board meeting one afternoon, the company's young engineers were debating a new model. They argued about design, about speed, about cost. The conversation grew heated until Weiss quietly raised his hand. The room fell silent. He said, "We are trying to make art again. But art doesn't win wars. Systems do. Machines that work, that can be fixed by anyone, anywhere. Those are what build nations." The younger men listened. Some had never known war, never seen hunger. For them, Germany was already strong, but for Weiss, strength had a different meaning. He walked to the blueprint table and drew a simple shape, a standard bolt, identical to thousands of others. He said, "This," he tapped the paper, "is what won the world. Standardization. Efficiency. That's what the Americans taught me." Later that evening, after the meeting ended, one of the young designers approached him. "Herr Weiss," he asked, "is it true you once worked on an American truck during the war?" Weiss smiled faintly. "Yes. I repaired one that changed the way I saw everything." "Did it really make you think Germany would lose?" He looked at the young man and nodded slowly. "That truck didn't make me think it. It made me know it." The designer hesitated. "And now?" Weiss's eyes softened. "Now I think we won something greater. We learned how to build like them, but better. We learned that power means nothing without purpose." The next day, the factory's engineers began developing a new model of transport truck. It wasn't flashy or fast, but it was reliable, efficient, and easy to repair. The kind of vehicle that could serve farmers, builders, and traders alike. When it was finished, they named it the KW60, using Weiss's initials in quiet tribute. At its unveiling, reporters from across Europe arrived. The company's director gave a long speech about progress and partnership. But when the applause faded, he asked Weiss to say a few words. The old mechanic stepped up to the microphone. He spoke simply. "We once built machines to destroy. Now we build them to connect. Every bolt we tighten, every engine we start is a promise that we've learned from the past. I once repaired a foreign truck that showed me my country's defeat. Today, I help build trucks that show our nation's rebirth." The hall erupted in applause. Cameras flashed, yet Weiss, modest as ever, simply smiled and stepped back. As months passed, the KW60 rolled out across Europe. It became known for its durability and simplicity. A truck anyone could fix, anywhere. Truck drivers from Italy to Denmark praised its strength. Mechanics admired its clean design. And inside every factory that produced it, workers whispered about the man who had once seen the future in an enemy machine. One afternoon, Weiss received a letter written on American stationery. It was from John Walker, his old friend and colleague from the Reconstruction years. "Dear Carl," it began, "I saw the KW60 at a trade show in New York. I knew it was yours the moment I looked under the hood. You've done what we Americans always hoped Europe would do. Take what works, make it your own, and make it better. I'm proud of you, old friend." Weiss folded the letter carefully and placed it inside his notebook, the same notebook he had carried since the war. Its pages were now filled with sketches, notes, reflections. The war entries were dark and heavy. The later ones were filled with blueprints and ideas. On the last page, he wrote, "The student has learned from the teacher. The machine that once defeated us now lives within us. The future belongs to those who build." In 1965, Carl Weiss traveled to France for an international auto exhibition. It was the first time he had returned to that land since the war. The event was held in Paris, in a massive glass hall filled with vehicles from around the world. As he walked through the displays, he felt a strange pull toward one corner of the exhibition. There, surrounded by polished chrome and bright lights, stood an old relic, a fully restored GMC CCW truck from World War II. He stopped in front of it, motionless. It looked exactly as he remembered. The olive green paint, the solid wheels, the proud white star on its door. A small plaque at its base read, "The truck that kept the Allies moving." For a long time, Weiss said nothing. Then, in a quiet voice, he whispered, "You're still running, old friend." An American curator standing nearby overheard him. "You like the truck, sir?" he asked with a smile. Weiss nodded. "I once knew one just like it. It changed my life." The curator chuckled. "Changed your life? How's that?" Weiss looked at him for a moment, then replied, "It taught me how to lose and how to rebuild." The American paused, then extended his hand. "Then I'd say it did its job." Weiss shook his hand firmly. "Yes," he said softly, "better than most soldiers ever could." That night, Weiss returned to his hotel room and stood by the window, watching the city lights flicker below. Paris was alive again. Music, laughter, movement. The world had moved on, but he knew that buried somewhere in every engine, every design, every hum of progress was the echo of that truck's engine, the same quiet rhythm that had once told him the truth about war and peace. In his final years, Weiss continued to mentor young engineers. He never boasted about his past. Instead, he taught them humility, that technology was not about pride, but about purpose. He often said, "A good machine doesn't shout, it just works." When Carl Weiss passed away in 1971, his colleagues found his notebook still on his desk. On the very last line, written in his steady handwriting, were 6 words. "The truck never stopped. Neither did we." The company later built a small memorial in his honor, placed beside the first KW60 ever made. And next to it, they mounted a bronze plaque depicting the outline of an American GMC truck, a symbol not of defeat, but of transformation. Visitors who came to the factory would sometimes pause there, reading the inscription beneath his name. He once repaired the enemy machine. Then he used its lesson to rebuild his nation. Years turned into decades. Germany became one of the world's leading automotive powers, exporting vehicles across the globe. But few knew that part of that success traced back to one quiet mechanic who, in the fog of war, had climbed into the cab of a captured truck and seen the future. And somewhere in that vast chain of history, the sound of an engine still echoed, the same steady hum that had once filled a cold barn in France. It was more than the sound of a machine. It was the heartbeat of progress, the rhythm of a nation reborn, and the whisper of a man who understood that even from the ashes of defeat, the wheels of hope can still turn forever.